And we're back, and it's COMP392, and it's week 1, lesson 1, part 5. And we're live and native on Windows 10. We're using my Mac with Bootcamp. Okay, so again, I'm going to pull up Visual Studio 2015 this time, and as long as it doesn't fail. It's a little skewed because you might see it a little weird on your screen because it's a projector, so please bear with me, like I said. But otherwise, we're going to do the same thing from scratch again. So you're going to see it one more time for those people who just can't get enough of it, right? And like I said, I'm not recommending one over the other. I'm not saying it's better to use Visual Studio or VS Code. I like using VS Code because it's modern. It's a modern approach to developing on the web. It's cross-platform and it's lightweight, right? Other people like using Visual Studio 2013 or 2015 because it's a powerhouse and there's nothing wrong with that, right? So again, we're going to go new project here in Visual Studio, and this is assuming you've got everything installed properly. You're using VS Web Essentials for Visual Studio, and I'm going to click on Web, ASP.NET Web Application, and we're going to call this thing, like I said before, some kind of 3JS demo, right? And I'll bring that project window up so you can see it, 3JS demo, right? Again, I'm creating a Git repository for this, and if you want to try this on the Visual Studio side, I'm pressing OK. I'm pressing empty. I'm not pressing anything else, no other option here in 2015. I'm pressing OK, so you can see it's the same. So I did the demo for 2013. This is the 2015 demo. I did the demo for VS Code. Any other editors? Stephen, please say no. All right, and no, let's continue. I'm going to create a couple of folders like we did last time. So one of the folders is going to be my scripts folder. So I'm going to add new folder, scripts. And I'm going to go right-click here on the project, add new folder, contents. Right, and then I'm going to add in an my style folder, my style sheet, my app.css, which is just a blank CSS file, right, that I'm going to make, that's just going to make some comments that says something like, custom style sheets. There it is, some styles. And I'm going to close that off. I don't need that, probably won't use that again. And then in my scripts, this is where the magic happens, add, and notice how I have TypeScript file. Right, you need to have this option. If you don't have this option in Visual Studio, it's not configured properly. So again, check your version, and you may have to download VS Web Essentials and/or TypeScript from Tools, Extensions and Updates. And you click Online, and you hit TypeScript in the search bar. All right, if I go app.ts or just app by itself, it's going to kick off an app.ts file. I don't care for type definition files from NuGet, the package manager built into Visual Studio, so I'm going to say no for now. And then, just like before, I'm just going to open this up so you can see more detail here. I'm going to type in some stuff, and the first thing is I want to make this init function, so function init. Notice how I get some cool code hinting here. I'm going to make it so that it returns void right now. And inside my function init, I'm just going to do a simple console.log. So console.log, and we're going to send it to the console like my app has started, right? That's all it's going to say. And I'm going to save that file. Once I save it, Visual Studio transpiles it right away. There's no work to be done, right? Okay, cool. That's good. I'm going to go back to my Solution Explorer now. And here's my app.ts. I need an index.html. Whenever we do work on the web, we always tie everything together in my index.html file, right? You can't do stuff without index.html, especially with 3D and 2D, right? So I'm going to right-click here, and we're going to add a new, actually on the project, add a new file, an HTML page, and we're going to call it index. And notice it gives me a bit of a template here in Visual Studio that I didn't have in VS Code. One thing that's missing is lang is equal to English. Right, I want to put that in there for my language preferences, right? And here in my title, I'm going to put 3JS demo. And my head, I should put in some meta tags. I don't like where this meta tag is. I like putting my meta tags before my head, before my title. That's just a preference. It doesn't make any difference. But I also need the other meta tag, and I can just type it, right? So I'm going to say meta, and my meta tag, I'm going to put, again, name is equal to viewport, and then content is equal to width is equal to device width initial scale 1, and which is just a mobile extension. Right, if you've never done this before, don't worry. And by the way, if you want to get a template, like I said before in last day, you can always go to the web. And I always like going to Bootstrap, so getbootstrap.com. And if you go to Getting Started under Bootstrap, and if you scroll down a little bit, right, there's a section for my basic template. Here's a template for you. You can grab all this and delete the stuff you don't need, right? One thing I like from this template is this. This is a new meta tag for IE and Edge, right? So I want to kind of grab this one. I'm going to copy this one. I'm going to put this into Visual Studio since we're here, not because I need it. I'll put that in there, right? So, okay, so now that I've got my head tag going, I need to connect my my script tag. And the last example, I didn't even connect my app.css because I'm not really using it anyway. But let's make a script tag, and I could code it by hand. I can go script and then code it by hand. But why? Because Visual Studio does it for you. If I just drag and drop my script here, app.ts, if I drag and drop it before my body, it does it for you, right? Drag and drop, right? I just dragged it from here to there, done, right? And then let's make a comment. So HTML comments here would be, here's my JavaScript section. Really, what we're going to pump out is JavaScript at the end, right? And we need to connect my script somehow. We have to kick off my script because if you notice my app.ts file here, it's inside of an init function. So I can't just run it by itself. It has to be, I have to call my init function, right? And I can do that in a number of ways, but the easiest way for now, we're going to change this later on, is on my body tag, I can put an attribute called onLoad. It's an event that I'm listening for. I can, when my page loads, I can call the init function. That's what I'm doing here. So when the page loads, call the init function, and when it does, in my app.ts file here, it's gonna just pump out to the console app started. That's all it's gonna say, right? So let's check this out and see if it works. I'm gonna save everything, and I'm gonna run it in Chrome and see if it runs. So when Chrome runs in the background, what's happening is IIS, Internet Information Services, that server. It's a local server that runs, and it creates a little server for you. So you don't have to even do that HTTP server in the command line. It does it all for you in Visual Studio. Right-click and go inspect. And if I look at it, and if I'm done right, if I look at the console, and if I did everything correctly, forget the failed thing. Don't worry about that. It says app started, which means I'm good to go. So I've done everything. Now I need to connect it to GitHub, right? This is the next piece that I need to do before we leave for the day, right? So how do I do that? Well, I need a GitHub repo first, right? So let's do it on GitHub first. I'm going to go to GitHub, and I'm going to go to Centennial College, which where we are. And notice there's that last repo we made, 3JS demo VS Code. We're going to make another one, right? So I'm going to make a new repository, and we're going to call this 3JS demo, right, for Visual Studio. You know it's Visual Studio or VS Code, right? 3JS demo for Visual Studio. All right, we're going to create the repository here. Cool, cool. And once we've created the repository, it's right here, right? I can typically add this in the command line, but we're not doing command line. We're using Visual Studio. So how do I do that? So I'll go back to Visual Studio, and I'm going to stop the testing and everything else, the debugging. And notice on the bottom in Visual Studio, there is, in the Solution Explorer window, there's also something called Team Explorer. If you don't have this window, you can get it by going to View, right, if I'm not wrong. And if you look at Team Explorer, it'll pull up that window. But I got my Team Explorer right here. And what I want to do is I want to click on Changes, right? Changes. So notice that there's a bunch of changes that I made to my repository here. Now, initially, when I created my application, I clicked on Add to Git. Right? That's what I did. If you notice, if you follow the video, you can see that in the bottom, right? You have to add to source control, right? But notice these are all the files that I've added into Visual Studio. I also have to make sure there's nothing excluded. There's no untracked files. And there's two untracked files, my app.js, which is terrible not to track, and my app.js map. I need to track both those files. I want to add all. So I'm tracking it all. And I want to call this initial commit, right? Just like I did last time. Again, the commit that I'm giving it is just a name for my snapshot. All right, because remember, I've developed my code, I take a snapshot, and I send it up on GitHub. And now GitHub has the latest snapshot of my code. All right, that's what this name is. And then I click commit. Okay, cool. So my local repository, my local files have been committed to a local Git repository. But I haven't connected them yet to GitHub. I need to do that. In order for me to do that, I have to go back to home, and I got to click on sync, right? And when I do that, it's going to bring up this thing that says, hey, I don't have a remote repository here. Can you please configure it? Yes, I can. And I can take this root here from the remote repository, this URI, and I can copy it. And I'm going to go back to Visual Studio. And in here, I can paste it in and click publish. And when I click publish, we're good to go. It publishes up to Visual Studio. Now, if you've configured Visual Studio for the first time, it'll be just like that simple. If you haven't, then you click on home. And what you may need to do is go into settings and configure your repository settings. Here's my repository settings, my name, my email address, and all this kind of stuff. And for the first time, it may ask you to log in to GitHub, all right, if it hasn't done it before. But now if I go check on my GitHub, let's go check, right? If I refresh, you'll see that I have another repo, which is 3JS Demo Visual Studio under Centennial College, right? So I have a bunch now. I have two, right? So I have 3JS Demo for Visual Studio and 3JS Demo for VS Code. So no matter where you want to take it, if you want to try Visual Studio or VS Code, both ways work just fine for me. So what am I going to test you on next day? Because I'm testing you guys. Next day when you guys come in, please watch the videos, what I recommend, right? I'm going to test you on that first piece on 3D. And for people who missed day one, I'm going to ask you questions like, what are the three main components or properties of every three-dimensional object that you see out there? And what are they? Who remembers? Yes. Sides, edges is what it's called. Edges, vertices, and faces, right? I know simple stuff, right? And, you know, how do if you think about this, we've been talking a lot about VS Code and all this kind of stuff. I'm going to probably ask you some questions around VS Code because we talked a lot about it, right? About VS Code, right? I've also talked a lot about, you know, some stuff about Visual Studio and GitHub configuration. We talked about Bower last day as well, how to set up Bower. That's another configuration, a bit of a configuration headache, and so on, right? One thing I didn't do is I didn't cover all the piece parts to the PowerPoint presentation this week because we ran into some issues, and that's fine. I have lots of time with you guys. So I didn't cover all the stuff in the PowerPoint presentation. I kind of went up to the point where you're passing it there. Keep going up, 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 up. More. No, the other way, Where in the requirements for 3JS, where it says requirements to use 3JS, I covered that piece. Requirements to use 3JS, right? So if you want to read on Visual Studio, right, or on the stuff that we've done, and you want to study for next day, it's going to be, like I said, 5 to 10 questions on the stuff we've covered up until today, right? And it's going to happen every single week, right? So please study your stuff. It's worth probably 1% of your mark every single week, right? So at the end, it'll be like 10% of your final mark if you don't attend, right, and don't answer the questions properly. So please attend, please. It's going to be a closed book test. There's no open book on this one. It's you studying and understanding what I'm asking, right? So it's a little bit more challenging than what I had before. Sorry, Steve. But it should be fine if you've studied. It's not going to be questions that you don't understand. I'm not going to ask you. I'm not going to trick you, right? If I've said it on the video and if I've talked about it in class, you're going to get it inside on the little short test that I'm going to do with you. And also, one more thing before we go, remember that your GitHub stuff is due on Friday. I know I said it a couple times, but that's worth 1% of your final grade too, right? Which would be very bad if you didn't have that done. So again, if I was going to just to run the 3JS thing, one person asked me before we go, my 3JS boilerplate, is it compatible with Visual Studio? And the answer right now is no. You have to download it. I'm going to download my 3JS boilerplate here. I'm going to put it on my desktop, right? And I'm going to open it up, right? So I can uncompress it here on my desktop, That's one option that I have. So here, I got my 3JS boilerplate. Here it is, right? And what I want to do is I want to use a 7-zip or something else to extract it here, right? And let's try that again. I want to use 7-zip or something else to extract it as an example and call it 3JS master. Yeah, sure. Probably already have it. I know, I probably already have it. I probably already made something else before. All right, so no, there's no Counter-Strike in this desktop. I don't know what you're talking about. It's an illusion. All right, and then so what you got to do is here in all this stuff that I've got here, right? I'm missing a couple things. I don't have my, I don't have my JavaScript libraries here at all, right? I use Bower for that, right? So one thing to do would be you have to reinstall your JavaScript libraries in here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put up a version that's compatible with VS Code, Visual Studio for you guys, so you can start off. And all my examples will be both. There'll be 2 examples, one for Visual Studio and one for VS Code, right? Because I don't include my JavaScript libraries, right? But if you really wanted to create them anyway, right? Notice how I'm missing a lib folder. Oh, actually they're there. Ha! That's good. I could simply drag and drop everything into its proper place. And let me show you that. So here's Visual Studio. And notice how I'm going to stop debugging here. I'm going to go to Solution Explorer. And under Solution Explorer, I have my content and my scripts. Well, what I want to do is I want to make my own a new empty project. So I'm going to go File, Close Solution, and File, Close. I'm going to go File, New, Project. And in here, I'm going to rename it to 3JS boilerplate and press OK. And it's going to be an empty project here, right? And it's not going to have anything over here. That's good, right? Then I'm going to do is I'm going to drag all this stuff over here. Let's try that and see if it fails. So I love when it fails. It's amazing when it fails. Okay, don't work. Hey. It worked one time. Can you believe it? One time it worked for me. So now this is everything you need to make it go, right? So theoretically, if I was to run this project, the index.html, and everything worked properly, let's see if it actually will work for me by the end of the day. Then you get this, right? So it actually would work. So now this Visual Studio, this project, this boilerplate project is working in Visual Studio. And if you notice, I have this control bar that I can use to change the rotation speed and everything else, right? That's what we're going to be doing in this course. We're going to be making 3-dimensional objects with code, no drag and drop, right? And you can use Visual Studio Code or Visual Studio. Hey, I made this work. What the hell? Let's upload this to GitHub. Why not? We're here, right? So let's not kill it, right? So we're going to go into here. I'm going to create a new repository, and we're going to call this 3JS boilerplate, and we'll call it for Visual Studio. So if you want to have Visual Studio, want to start off, you'll have this too, right? And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to connect it just the same way I did before. I'm just going to grab this little thing here, copy it, go into Visual Studio for the first time, go to Team Explorer, go to Home, go to Changes, make sure there's nothing excluded, like all these untracked files, add them all in, right? And go in here and say, yeah, there's one thing I don't want to do. My git ignore, I want to get rid of my git ignore file. But anyways, we'll do that later. So initial commit that. And once I've done that, I'm going to go home, sync, fire in that URL, publish, and then it's done, right? Now, the only problem that I have is I have a git ignore file. My git ignore file ignores scripts lib, so it won't do that. So I'm going to take it out. So you guys have it again. Skip, and I'll do another version of changes, updated git ignore file. There you go. And add all those untracked files. And now there's nothing untracked. And I'll commit this. I'll go home and I'll sync, right? And once I sync, then your synchronization there, you should have everything, right? And when I go up to GitHub now and refresh, you have a version of the 3JS boilerplate that's compatible with Visual Studio, with all your files. Okay? Questions? Please, before I go, questions, yes. Okay, we'll talk later. You're okay? I'll upload those two. Yeah, I have the volume. Don't worry, I'll upload those two. I had a backup for that. Anyone else? You go to github.com/Centennial College. Okay? Yes. Same thing? Yeah. So I stole the Centennial College name. It's mine. Next. What else? I'm lying. It just was available as an organization, right? Anyone else have any questions over there? All right, guys. If no other questions, see you guys. For who doesn't have me in the next class, if you're not taking COMP305, then I'll see you next week. If you're taking COMP305, I'll see you in 2 hours. And that's it for me. Finally.